In Acts 2, at Pentecost, black Africans hear the word and bring it home. In Acts 8, an Ethiopian treasury official converts after reading Isaiah 53 and travels to Nubia as a witness.
In Acts chapter 11, men from Cyrene and Cyprus came to Antioch and proclaimed the message to the Greeks also. Of course, it shows that Africans were among the first to send out missionaries that way. In Acts 13, you see these two men, Simeon, called the Black Man, and Lucius of Cyrene. Black Christians took the initiative and leadership in the mission of the church from the very beginning. The time has come for black Christians to renew a vision to reach all nations with the gospel.
By the year 250, the North African Church had 250 bishops. Early theological foundations for the church were laid by Africans such as Cyprian, Origen, Tertullian, and Augustine. Under this leadership, the African church survived the decline of Roman power and multiple persecutions.
Persecution against African Christians pushed many out along the trade routes of Asia and Africa. Coptic Christians from Egypt ventured south to Nubia. They found many believers in the God of Israel, a community dating back to Makeda, Queen of Sheba. By 330 AD, this area was Christian.
In 568, Longinus of Alexandria preached in Nobode and Alodai. He ordained local clergy and taught many converts. This African effort lasted 1,000 years before succumbing to Christianity's strict monotheistic rival, Islam. Islam began when an Arabian merchant, Muhammad, claimed to receive revelations which he collected in the Quran. In 622, Muhammad built an army with a missionary purpose, to convert or subdue the world. By 710, the Muslims conquered North Africa and virtually wiped out the church. Some Christians continued in their faith under restrictions, but tens of thousands were absorbed into Islam.
And the Muslims, my brother, have started a renaissance, a revival that can only be compared to the period in North Africa before the Crusades. I mean, the Muslims are on the march.
As the Western Church pursued the ill-fated Crusades, the black church in Sudan flourished. And in Ethiopia, Coptic Christian kings built the great rock-hewn churches of Roha, still used today. Yet, the black African church felt Muslim pressure from all sides. To the west, the empires of Mali and Songhai passed in and out of Muslim control. To the north and east, Muslim traders threatened invasion. Finally, around 1540, Somali Muslims attacked Aksum. King Lebna Dengel appealed to the Portuguese for help. In 1543, the Portuguese recaptured Aksum and saved the Coptic Church. But from their contact with the Muslims, the Portuguese learned slave trading, a shadow of things to come. In Europe, as the new Reformation movement struggled to survive, devoted Catholic missionaries circled the globe with seafaring adventurers.
In 1484, Portuguese Captain Diego Gam invited some Africans from the Congo to come to Portugal as students. Gam returned to Congo with them a year later. The Africans had learned Portuguese and the Christian faith. Impressed, the king was baptized along with his wife and oldest son. The son took the name Alfonso, but his younger brother refused conversion. When missionaries preached against polygamy, the king relapsed. Alfonso was banished. After the king died, Alfonso returned to win the throne in battle against his brother. As king, Alfonso established Christian churches and schools. But after Alfonso's death in 1543, the immoral behavior of missionaries and the booming Portuguese slave trade nearby undermined his work, and the church vanished.
In the 17th century, the European slave trade supported large plantations in the New World. The conquerors relied heavily on African labor. For 3.5 centuries, roughly 20 million Africans were caught and herded onto disease-ridden ships for the brutal Atlantic passage. Black Catholic workers such as Peter Clavier met slave ships in Cartagena. Clavier, a former college professor, served lepers and baptized thousands of slaves.
Israel was in Egypt's land. Let my people go.
In the 18th century, Protestants began to move out in missions. The British Society for the Propagation of the Gospel preached among slaves in North America.
What happened was that this stuff that was being preached by the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel was, in essence, a total twisting of the gospel. They totally emphasized scriptures like slaves will be obedient to your masters and those kind of things, almost to the exclusion of the real content of the gospel. The slaves never really bought it either. That's kind of an amazing thing to see how, in spite of all those setbacks and things like that, God was still speaking to our people and getting through to us.
In 1735, a black Christian from Denmark named Christian Proten went to the Gold Coast. He was joined by Philip Kwache, a Gold Coast seminary student who had studied in Europe. Together, they formed Bible bands, which led revivals along the West African coast.
Philip Kwache really became sort of a main missionary to his own people. He catechized people, he helped in assisting the establishment of churches, he helped in teaching and training the people. In essence, he's an early example of a principle in missions, which is to say, if one does benefit in your experience, economically or educationally, there is that question of commitment back to the community.
Revival spread in America through the Great Awakenings, beginning around 1740. John Morant, a free black man from New York City, heard George Whitefield preach and became a preacher himself. Given to frequent trances, Morant wandered in the woods one day and met an Indian hunter who taught him to speak Cherokee. By 1775, Morant carried the gospel to Cherokee, Creek, Catawba, and Hoosaw tribes in New York State. He was eventually ordained an evangelist in England. When the American Revolution ended, the British evacuated from Savannah. They took along many blacks who had sought refuge behind British lines. George Lyle, a freed slave and a Baptist pastor, indentured himself to a British colonel going to Jamaica in 1782. This made Lyle the first American missionary overseas. He built a church of 3,000 members and founded the Jamaican Missionary Society. In 1807, Britain abolished its slave trade and established Sierra Leone as a refuge for freed slaves. Paul Cuffey, a wealthy black American missionary to Indians, sailed to Sierra Leone in one of his own ships. After investigating the colony, Cuffey personally organized and financed 38 settlers and saw this as a means of evangelizing Africa. Cuffey's effort encouraged the American Colonization Society, begun in 1816. Many blacks distrusted the motives of this society. They saw it as a racist means of expelling blacks from America at a time when racist pressure forced separatist movements under James Varick, Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, and Daniel Coker.
Allen opposed immigration. Coker, for one, saw the colonization movement as the only means of financing black missions. He immigrated to Liberia, West Africa, in 1821 with the first American Colonization Society ship and founded a church on board.
We have met with trials. We are but a handful. Our provisions are low. We are in a strange land. Yet tell my brethren to come. Fear not. The land is good. It only lacks men to possess it.
Lot Carey would be one of these men. Converted in a segregated church gallery in 1807, Carey taught himself to read and to preach. He bought his freedom and pastored the 800-member African Baptist Church in Richmond. The church began a mission society. Carey volunteered to be their first missionary and bid the church farewell.
I'm about to leave you and expect to see your faces no more. I long to preach to the poor Africans the way of life and salvation. I don't know what will befall me, nor am I anxious what may become of me. I feel it my duty to go.
Lot Carey, along with Cullen Teague, sailed to Liberia in 1821. Repeated attacks by tribal warriors did not deter Carey from reaching interior peoples with the gospel. He served settlers as doctor, teacher, and pastor. In 1829, as Carey prepared bullets to fight slave traders, a candle tipped. Carey was killed.
Lot Carey did not separate the social from the evangelical. He was concerned to demonstrate how the oppressed, those who had been victims, could construct a society that was just and a society that emphasized equity.
In America, black Methodists pushed west. John Stewart preached to the Wyandotte Indians of Ohio in 1815. He spoke through a black interpreter, Jonathan Pointer, who had been an Indian captive since youth. Pointer became a Christian along with many Indians.
William Paul Quinn of the AME Church, who was born in Calcutta and was of black and Hindu parentage, planted 47 churches in the Mississippi Valley, slave centers. Quinn sometimes fist-fought with Ku Klux Klanners during his sermons.
Racism and slavery ignited many flashpoints of violence. Nat Turner's rebellion of 1831 arose out of a biblical conviction to liberate the oppressed. Soon, slavery brought the entire nation to an explosive confrontation. The American Civil War broke slavery, but not the racist system. Under Reconstruction, segregation replaced slavery. Many black preachers, disillusioned about any future in America, preached a missionary vision for Africa. Entire churches transplanted overseas with pastors trained as sea captains. Many educated blacks looked to missions as a place to express leadership and initiative. The emotional pull was strong. Psalm 68 resounded in black colleges and churches. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands to God.
I believe the time has come when Christianity must be introduced on the banks of the Niger. The people are willing to receive any who may be sent among them.
The hand of God is on the black man in all the lands of his distant sojourn for the good of Africa. This continent is to be reclaimed for Christ.
The doctor says I have only a few years to live. The road to heaven is as near from Africa as it is from here. I will go.
God directs my heart and mind to Africa. I cannot enter my Father's kingdom unless I do just what he commands me to do. Go ye into all the world.
The newspaper and printing work has moved on smoothly. The longer I stay, the better I like the work.
I pray that many of my own people will be led to a full consecration, so when I have fallen in battle, they may take up the standard.
William Henry Shepherd applied for African service, but the Southern Presbyterians refused to allow a black man to head their African work. They sent Shepherd along with a white man from Alabama, Samuel Lapsley, to the Congo in 1890. As equals, they preached and gave medical aid. Lapsley died of a fever, and like it or not, the Presbyterians had a black man leading their African mission.
White agencies no longer recruited black missionaries when new medicines protected whites from tropical diseases. Even so, the black church had launched its own wave of missionaries, independent of whites.
Persecution, we shall overcome. Hard trial, we shall overcome. Discrimination, we shall overcome. We shall overcome someday.
William Colley, who had been a missionary for Southern Baptists, came back imbued in 1878-79 with the idea of Negro Americans sponsoring their own missionaries. So in 1882, 6 missionaries went to the west coast of Africa, and there they established the Bendu Industrial Mission. And within a few months, they paid dearly for their endeavor. One of them died immediately in childbirth. Another died from jungle fever. The health of some of these people was irreparably damaged, and they had to return. But they were so dedicated to the cause, they felt very much like that hymn, "A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify."
Emma Delaney built her cabin in the middle of a Liberian battlefield, the scene of a terrible slaughter. The people were afraid of the field, thinking it was full of spirits. Emma proved her power over the spirits by giving simple first aid to the children.
I tell the story of the little children in Uganda, the oldest 15, the youngest 11, who died as martyrs in 1885, who stood before an angry non-Christian king and said, "We love to serve you, your majesty, but we can't serve if it offends our king, Jesus." The king was furious. 4 miles away, the little boys were tied and put in the dry grass and burnt. And they died singing, "Oh, that I had wings like angels. I would have flown and been with Jesus." They died and the church began.
We shall overcome someday.
Near the turn of the century, the number of black Americans involved in missions declined. This was due to 3 major factors. First, colonial governments in Africa and Asia refused to admit black missionaries, fearing them as possible agitators of rebellion. White agencies refused black candidates.
Black Church of America really got burned very badly by that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people say the black church is not missions-minded. I think it was such a traumatic thing that they just shut down completely, and the next generation never picked up on it. So there's almost an amnesia on the black church's part about its missionary heritage.
Second, Jim Crow segregation, lynchings, and terrorism in Dixie forced church energy inward to survive. Third, floods and crop failures in the South pushed masses of job-seeking blacks into northern ghettos. White violence against blacks increased in the cities. Local community development became the mission of the church. Pastors and former missionaries led the NAACP, Urban League, and Niagara movement. To maintain a missionary vision abroad, 28 black clergymen formed the Lot Carey Convention. This group sent workers to Africa, Central America, India, and Soviet Russia during a time of political upheaval. Following 2 world wars, white colonial empires collapsed. Where white missionaries withdrew, black missionaries were welcomed, such as in India, Burma, Thailand, Congo, and Communist China. Darius Swan served on the faculty of the University of Nanjing and wrote in 1951,
"The Negro Christian's experience has better prepared him to speak to the distress of the East than one from any other group. In a world where suffering and hardship seem the dominant motif, the Negro Christian may have an outstanding contribution to make to the healing of the nations."
But some nationalist movements ejected all missionaries. Afrikaner nationalists in South Africa enforced apartheid, silencing many black missionaries and pastors. But apartheid's evil sister in America, segregation, was in for a fight.
Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens,
The nationalistic movement in the black community heightened our interest in ministering to our own people where we were. It wasn't an exclusive thing, but the feeling was, why do we need to go overseas when we've got people in worse shape right here in America?
That would be somewhat of a negative side, although someone could say that was positive in the sense that it did focus attention on the needs. It reminded us that missions had to touch the whole man.
free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Home issues got all the attention. But meanwhile, many others in black denominations and agencies continued faithfully in missions abroad. Montrose Waite pioneered independent black faith missions overseas.
Many others followed in this faith ministry tradition, such as Joe Jetter, Tom Skinner, Ben Johnson, Ernie Wilson, William Bentley, and Desi Webster. Such visionaries kept missions a priority in the National Black Evangelical Association. Their vision for global evangelism abides in former NBEA President Reuben Connor.
The time has come. I think this is a real appropriate time for blacks to renew their commitment for world missions. The time has come because a lot of the oppressed people of the world are getting their independence. I think the black Christian community especially have real affinity with some of these emerging, struggling people.
A question that has been frequently asked as I've traveled to South Africa and Nigeria, where are the black missionaries from America? Where are they? Do they have a vision?
Perhaps for the first time in the history of black Americans, we are in a position to make a more significant contribution to the mission of Jesus Christ. We are far more educated. We are far more well-trained. The heritage continues. The time has come for black Americans to join the rest of the body of Christ on this terrestrial ball to continue the work that Christ gave us to do. It is our responsibility.